I've heard people talking about 2016, though, and I've heard a lot of people say that they are glad that 2016 is over. I've heard them use words like brutal with regard to a lot of people who passed away in 2016. And we've buried some of our own, as you well know. So this day is a day of new beginnings, but as we think about new beginnings, I think one of the best things we could do is think about our eventual end. I think that's only wise. What do we say about the two things that are guaranteed? Death and taxes. Now, what if God said, I'll take care of your taxes, don't worry about it? Would you worry about your taxes? Well, not if God said don't worry about it. Hey, God's going to take care of my taxes. I'm looking forward to April 15th. Now, who's ever said that? I'm going to be free and clear. But God doesn't say, I'm going to take care of your taxes. He did, however, say, I'm going to take care of death for you. And every time we look at the cross, that's what we're reminded of. God came in the flesh and He died taking our place in death. So that when we come to that point in life where we make the cross over, so to speak, it's nothing we need to fear. As a matter of fact, it's something we can look forward to. I got a list here. I compiled this list from news reports. It's a list of celebrities who passed away. In other words, notable folks that probably a lot of us, if not all of us, would know. I don't know that all of us would know all of these names, and I don't have all the names, but here are some of them, just so you'll recognize the notable people, and that notable people have in fact died. The world of music lost Glenn Frey, or Fry. You know who he was? One of the guys helped start the Eagles. Who hasn't heard Eagles music? Some of it's pretty good. David Bowie also died. I don't know if we have as many people who listen to David Bowie's stuff as we do that listen to the Eagles, but we probably all have some idea who he is. Another guy that's probably not so well known is Paul Kantner, but he was with a group called Jefferson Airplane. Anybody ever hear Jefferson Airplane? All the old teenagers in the audience, old hippies, don't know what to do. Grab onto the old, hang on to the new, or something like that. I think it's the other way around. And Maurice White, Earth, Wind, and Fire. Man, who doesn't love Earth, Wind, and Fire? That is good stuff. Keith Emerson, guess what group he was with? Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Any of you kids ever heard of Emerson, Lake and Palmer? Merle Haggard, the Okie from Muskogee. He's gone. He's gone this year. Prince, a fellow named Prince, heard his music. And then Ralph Stanley, might not be quite so familiar with the name Ralph Stanley, but he's kind of the godfather of bluegrass, traditional bluegrass music. If you saw the movie, Old Brother, Where Art Thou? Anybody see that movie? Then you heard Ralph Stanley if you've seen that movie. Hollywood, they lost Alan Rickman. Man, that was a sad day. I like those Harry Potter movies, and I think he played a fantastic part. He was an actor and did a great job in those movies. But we also lost Dan Haggerty. Anybody remember Dan Haggerty? Grizzly Adams, that's who he was. If you remember the character of Grizzly Adams, what a beloved guy he was. He's gone. And then Joe Alaskey. His name sounds like Alaska, but it's Alaskey. And you probably say, who in the world is Joe Alaskey? Well, if you've ever watched a Bugs Bunny cartoon, or a Daffy Duck cartoon, then you have heard the voice of Joe Alaskey because he died this year and he was the guy that did their voices. Yeah, we've heard his voice. We know that guy. George Kennedy. How many of you remember George Kennedy as an actor? He was one of the old Hollywood actors, but this was a guy who wasn't just an actor. He enlisted in 1943 when World War II was going red hot. And before we knew that we were going to win, like we ever really knew that we were going to win, he signed up. He wanted to be a fighter pilot, but he didn't make it into fighter pilot school. They put him in the infantry. You know, that's real close to being a fighter pilot. But this guy served under General Patton, and he earned 2 Bronze Stars. And then he came back from the war, and he went into Hollywood acting, and he was in, appropriately, the World War II movie, The Dirty Dozen. He was also in Cool Hand Luke, if you ever saw that movie. Very well-known actor back in his day. Patty Duke. I don't know how many would know who Patty Duke is, but everybody knew who Patty Duke was in her day. She was the one who played the part of Helen Keller in the Helen Keller story. That's who Patty Duke was. She's dead and gone now. Gene Wilder. Have you seen the movie about the chocolate factory? He did a fantastic job playing that part. So did Captain Jack Sparrow when he did it later. But Gene Wilder was the first in the original. Did a fantastic job. Zsa Zsa Gabor. Now this is interesting that Zsa Zsa is dead and gone. She was one of 3 sisters from Hungary. Yeah. Don't be thinking about lunch. This is a country. They came over from Hungary, and they became successful in the movie business. They became great celebrities, those 3 sisters, Ava, Zsa Zsa, and what was the other girl's name? I don't think I wrote it down. Eva, Zsa Zsa, and then there's Magda. Anyway, those 3 sisters. How about that? Come over from Hungary, but they became American icons. Really. Doris Roberts, she played the mom in Everybody Loves Raymond. She played a great part. She just irritated me to death every time I saw her. But it was a great part. She's gone. She's gone with the rest of these. Gary Shandling, a beloved comedian, is gone. John Amos of Good Times. He was the dad in Good Times. Everybody remembers Dynamite, but the dad was another very heavy. I related to him because I was the dad. I thought, yeah, raising a family, it can be difficult, it can be challenging. Morley Safer, remember him from 60 Minutes, the news reporter? He's dead and gone this year. Alan Young, if you've ever seen reruns of Mr. Ed, the talking horse, Alan Young was the straight guy. I think I would have shot that horse if I had played him, but he did a good job. And then the man from U.N.C.L.E., Robert Vaughn. When I was a kid, I watched that show every week. I thought, this is the coolest show, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., if you ever watched that show. And Robert Vaughn not only played in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., but he was also in the original Magnificent Seven. He was one of those gunslingers who used to save the town. Just a classic actor. He played alongside in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., a guy by the name of David McCallum. David McCallum is still alive. As a matter of fact, he's now starring in the TV show NCIS. But David McCallum, it's interesting, he's a Scottish actor, but in the movie or the show Man from U.N.C.L.E., he played a Russian spy. But a good Russian spy. And back in the day, I thought, well, these guys, they're showing us that it's Russian people who can be good. It's not just, we got to be hateful of everybody who's Russian. That was kind of the take I had when I was a teenager and watched them. I liked David McCallum better than Robert Vaughn, I thought. But I really like both of them. And Robert Vaughn is gone now. Florence Henderson. My goodness, the mother from the Brady Bunch. Debbie Reynolds. And you probably know the story about Debbie Reynolds. She passed away shortly after her daughter passed away. And her daughter was Princess Leia. That's who everybody knew her as. And boy, here's a guy, you probably won't know his name. His name was Gary Marshall. But if you've ever watched Happy Days or Laverne and Shirley, if you've ever watched The Odd Couple or Mork and Mindy, then you watched his work because he was the guy that put those shows together. Quite an influential fellow in Hollywood. Noel Neill, I didn't even remember this name, but Noel Neill was the first Lois Lane in the original Superman series. Sports, Joe Garagiola. And all you young kids are going, who? Who's that guy? But all the old folks are going, oh yeah, he was a household name back in the days of baseball being popular. Muhammad Ali. He was I am the greatest. Float like a butterfly. Sting like a bee. He's gone. And so is Arnold Palmer. People still remember Arnold Palmer by the drink that he made famous. You go to a restaurant, you order you order that guy's name. What are you going to get? You're going to get iced tea mixed with lemonade because that was an Arnold Palmer. Now, it wasn't an alcoholic drink because that's not how he made it famous. Janet Reno. You remember Janet Reno? She was a very popular political figure. She was the very first woman to become the U.S. Attorney General. And then John Glenn passed away. Wow. I remember John Glenn from when I was a kid because he was the first guy to orbit the planet. Dead and gone. This guy wasn't an American, but who doesn't remember Fidel Castro? He's gone to meet his maker. Tell me he wasn't a part of Americana so many times as we heard his name. And then Nancy Reagan also, dead and gone. I'll stop here. These are enough names just to give you a flavor. You know what's ahead for us? Every single one of us, one of these days somebody's going to be saying our name and that this is the year we died. Now we mourn these folks because we don't want them to be gone. We like to have their work and their influence. But all of us are going to die. It doesn't matter how much popularity we find ourselves enjoying. It doesn't matter how much money we amassed, how famous we are. It doesn't matter how many movies we've been in. And none of that matters when it comes to dying. Only one thing matters when it comes to death, and that is, are we in a good relationship with God? That's all that matters. And nothing I've said here this morning was in any way meant to judge any of these people. I'm just saying that it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to die. It's coming to each one of us. And when I say that, there's a part of me that goes, oh no, I'm going to die. I remember learning this when I was 5 years old. I learned it from David Gooderham. Have I told you all about this story? We're out in the front yard. Yeah, some of you remember this story. I was 5 years old, about playing cars in the front yard of our place with David Gooderham, and he just, I don't know where he came up with it, said, Marty, you know you're going to die? I said, what? I am not. I said, yes, you are. You're going to die. And we argued for a while, I guess, and I started crying because I didn't want to die. And I went and got my mom, and she said, what's the matter with you? I said, I'm going to die. She said, well, honey, that's not for a long time yet. You mean I am going to die? My mom's telling me that I'm going to die. But there was something about the fact that my mom knew this and she wasn't worried about it that gave me comfort. Okay, if mom's not upset about this, then I probably should. I remember remembering that or thinking that as a child at 5 years old. If my mom's good with that, oops, sorry. Microphone's never done anything to me. I probably shouldn't hit it. But my mom was good with it, and so I found myself pretty good with it too. And then later on in life, I continued learning about God because even at that point, Mom was taking me to church. I was learning about God. I was learning about Jesus. And I eventually came to a point where I was old enough to understand this is why God came. This is why God came. We do church. And I don't criticize any of it. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing. Just like, wasn't it great the way Kim used that illustration of a freshly paved road that doesn't have any lines? How do we know what to do? Well, we're studying in the Sunday morning class how to study the Bible because we want to know from God what to do. And this is what we do. We read the book and we follow what it says. What's the point of that? Well, the point of that is that this isn't all there is. Everything we do in the name of God here is preparing us for the reality that's heaven. We're not staying here. None of us are. It's kind of like we're all in an airport. Oh, great. Well, at least I'll have Starbucks. Some of you are probably saying. Okay, we got Starbucks. But eventually we're all leaving. Eventually we're all leaving. Now, back in the day, I know I'm going back quite a ways for this, but when I was a kid, we had family members that would come and go from airports. And what we would be able to do at that point, because still days of a greater level of innocence, I suppose you would say, we would all go with them. Sometimes we would walk right out on the tarmac to the plane. And we would hug them, they would hug us, they would get on the plane, and they would fly away. And we would say, we love you, we'll see you again later. And they'd be gone. Other times, people would be coming. And so we'd go to the airport and we would wait right there where the plane's coming in. Because they would let you do that back in that day. They didn't worry about anybody blowing anything up. And they'd get off the plane and you could see them when the doors open, they're coming, hey, there they are, hey, and you run and you hug and you greet each other. It was fantastic. From our perspective, death is going to the airport to see somebody go away. But from God's perspective, Death is going to the airport to say, there they are, come on, hey, we've been waiting for you. Is that what you want when you die? That's what I want. I want there to be people lined up to say, there's Marty. What a goofball he was, but we love that guy. He's here, he finally died. Oh, he died? That's horrible. No, that's good. When you read Ecclesiastes, go to Ecclesiastes. I know we've done this before. I don't know how many times I've done it in funerals, but I don't know how many times I've done it in preaching sermons. In Ecclesiastes, says this about death, and I think this is what God meant when he said it in chapter 7. Puts these two things together. A good name is better than a good ointment, and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. How in the world could that be true? Well, in this worldly perspective, or from a worldly perspective, it can't be true. Death is horrible. Death is the worst. Death is what we mourn. But from God's perspective, you know what happens? We leave this place. Now, we celebrate birth. We love to see those little babies come into the world, and it's right to celebrate birth. There's nothing wrong about celebrating birth because we're seeing them come into our care, and we get to love them and see how innocent and sweet they are. We celebrate birth. We don't typically celebrate birth the same way because we see it so differently. But God says the day of your death is better than the day of your birth. Now, we see the sweet little babies coming into our care, but God looks down and he sees little babies being born into the world that is very dangerous, physically and spiritually. It's dangerous in this country, and this is probably one of the safest places in the world. Well, if you've traveled much abroad, you probably know that there's some places in the world that aren't very safe, and where you don't have the things that we enjoy here for the most part. But still, we're born into a world of sickness and disease, of sin, of hatred, of people fighting about everything, people being offended about everything, a world where people go hungry and little children die. We're throwing away food. Our New Year's resolution is to lose some weight. Somebody else in the world is thinking, if I just had a tenth of what you enjoy. And we can't fix all that. That's what God sees little children coming into. That's why Christian parents, godly parents are so important. Because when we die, there's an opportunity for us to go back to God. And that's why he says, I believe that the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. He says it's better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, because that's the end of every man, and the living will take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be happy. There is a happiness, there is a joy that goes through all the pain of this life, because we know that this life is not all there is. And not only is there a life after this life, but it is a life, an existence so unimaginably good that we can't imagine it. There's another text just here in this same chapter. The end of a matter is better than its beginning, verse 8. The end of a matter. I've asked people from time to time, and they've asked me, hey, if you could go back, would you do it? I said, no way. I don't want to go back and live through that mess again. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've done a lot of things wrong. Now, I've got a lot of things in life that I enjoy and I appreciate, but I don't want to go back. I want to go forward. I want to go on. And you might think I'm crazy, but there are times when I look forward to dying. Okay, I'm nuts, right? But with what God says, if we really get a grip on what God says, the only regret I think I would have about dying, now when it comes right down to it, I know, I haven't been there, so I don't know exactly how it would be, but I have this thought in mind, that the one regret I would have would be leaving my family. It's like you're in a place where a building's on fire or something, and the helicopter shows up, and the only person they grab is you. They grab you, put you on the helicopter, and fly away, and you go, no, I've got to get my family out of that place. I think that's what it's going to be like when we die as saints. We're carried to safety at death to be with the Lord. But our families will still be here. I think that's going to be my main regret. The day of our death is better than the day of our birth. How about that? No, I still want presents and a cake. But the day of our birth is better than the day of our death. There's a passage in the Psalms. It's just one small verse, but it's huge. It's in Psalm 116. I'll read part of the context so you can pick up in it. It's Psalm 116, starting at verse 12. What shall I render to the Lord for all his benefits toward me? Boy, there's a question. I shall lift up the cup of salvation and call upon the name of the Lord. Salvation, that's where it's at. I'll pay my vows to the Lord. Oh, may it be in the presence of all his people. And then he says, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his godly ones. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his godly. It's interesting. It doesn't say precious in the sight of the Lord is the birth of his godly ones. That's something else about Christmas. There's nothing in the Scriptures that say, I want you to celebrate Christmas. I want you to look forward to my son's birthday, and I want you to do this and do that about my son's birthday. And I'm not saying it's wrong for us to have trees and traditions and things like that. I think it's great that so much of the world is thinking about Jesus, at least to some degree, one time a year. But what did Jesus teach us? Well, he taught us to memorialize his death. Every Sunday, every Lord's Day, we get together as the church does worldwide. And we eat a little unleavened bread to remember the body that was given for us. We drink a little grape juice to remember the blood that was shed for us. Why did he do that? Well, he shed that blood in his death. He didn't spill it. It wasn't an accident. It was totally on purpose. He shed his blood and he gave his body for us so that we would not have to die. We would not have to die. He became a curse for us. He became a sin for us. He became death for us. One of these days, each one of us will close our eyes for the last time, but it won't be death if we're in Christ. Because we'll close them to the light of this world and we'll open them to the eternal light. Wow. One of these days. So far beyond. The text that was read for us from John chapter 5 says this. Don't marvel at this. An hour is coming in which all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and will come forth. Those who did the good deeds to a resurrection of life, and those who committed the evil deeds to a resurrection of judgment. One resurrection, but two kinds of resurrection in that one resurrection. Life and judgment. I want life. How about you? God says, I came to give you life. I remember hearing a story. I don't know if it was a true story. Maybe I should have researched it to find out if there was any truth to it. But the story was of a soldier in ancient days who was a soldier with great valor. But he had a physical problem and he went to see a doctor about it. And the doctor said, well, this physical problem is something that's going to kill you probably in about 6 months. And the soldier said, wow, I'm going to die in 6 months? So he went back to war. And in every battle, he threw himself into the front, into the fray, the worst, thickest fighting. He said, I'm going to die fighting. But he didn't die. He had such courage and such ferocity in his fighting that he killed all the soldiers around him. And the battle would be won every time, and he would be right at the head of it. And he thought, well, I didn't die. Well, eventually he got a message from that doctor. And the doctor said, my diagnosis was mistaken. And according to the story, the soldier fell back in ranks because now he was afraid of death. When he knew it was imminent, when he knew it wasn't something he could get away from, he said, I'm going to go out and I'm just going to go out in a blaze of glory. But when he found out, I might be able to cling to life. That's why Jesus says, when you come to me with everything you've got. You take up your cross every day and you die to yourself. You give it up for me. And what's Jesus going to do? He's going to give it back to us in spades, as they say. I'm not sure exactly what that means or where it came from, but I know it means a whole lot more than what you put in. So, why would we not want to do that? If the day of our death has such potential to be better than the day of our birth, that's how I want it to be. And Jesus says we can make it that way. He died, and in His death, He saved us from our sin. And in His resurrection, we see hope for our resurrection. And baptism is the simplest thing and yet a very profound thing. That's the point at which we come into the church, come into salvation. And according to Romans chapter 6, it's a reenactment. And really, that's not quite right. It's a revisiting of the death and the burial and the resurrection. Because a reenactment is just where, well, you did what somebody did a long time ago. But that's not what you're doing in baptism. You're revisiting. You're going back to the death of Jesus. You're being buried into the death of Christ, according to Romans chapter 6, verses 3 and 4. And you're buried into the death of Christ, being united with Christ in His death, to rise to walk in what kind of life? Newness of life. Excellent. You know that. For anyone who didn't know that, listen to those words. You rise to walk in new life. And that new life is what we have when we face death. We close our eyes for the last time. We're not dead. We're alive in Christ. If that's what you would want this morning, if that's what you want for this new year, because who knows, by the time they get to the end of 2017, somebody might be saying, well, remember, we lost Marty last year. Somebody's going to be saying, yeah, I remember that sermon he preached. He was glad to go. If that's what happens to me, I hope that's what folks are able to say. But it's true in Christ. You know it is. Let's stand and sing the invitation song for any who'd like to respond this morning.